Let's talk about that. And an expert to talk about such matters is our good friend, former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz, who Skypes in from Washington, D.C. Fred, are you surprised at how simple this process turned out to be for an American to join up as a mercenary in the fight against ISIS if they were no longer part of the U.S. military?
Hey, JD, good to be here and Happy New Year. I was disturbed about this for two reasons. First of all, it was entirely too easy for someone who had no real credentials with the Syrian rebels to enter the country and fight with them. And I think that what Catherine Herridge reported on her story on Fox, I think it was really an incredible development. Just as important is what this guy says about how incompetent and how poorly trained and how poorly armed these troops are. And it raises real questions about the president's strategy to use the so-called moderate Syrian rebels to fight ISIS.
Well, let's detail that some. Just how bad is it on the part of those anti-ISIS forces?
Well, we know that they're in trouble for a number of reasons. First of all, they had been in cahoots with the al-Nusra Front, the official al-Qaeda franchise in Syria. However, the al-Nusra now seems to be siding with ISIS, and they're fighting against the moderate Syrian rebels. ISIS is much better armed, and the moderate Syrian rebels are at war with ISIS, the al-Nusra Front, and they're at war with the Assad regime. The weapons they've been provided by other countries have been very limited. So, I mean, I think they're in a very bad situation, and our training program is not going to get them ready to fight ISIS for at least a year. And, of course, we have to find these moderate Syrian rebels, and I'm still not sure how that's going to happen.
Fred, let's turn to another source of concern in the Mideast, Iran. Let's take a listen to our president's interpretation of that nation's ambitions and then get your reaction.
They have a path to break through that isolation, and they should seize it, because if they do, there's incredible talent and resources and sophistication inside of Iran, and it would be a very successful regional power that was also abiding by international norms and international rules, and that would be good for everybody.
The president went on to say he would not rule out putting an American embassy in Tehran. Your take on the president's perception of Iran?
Well, let me tell you something about this interview, JD. The president said this between the 17th and 19th of December to NPR. And the 17th is when the president said he's going to open up an embassy in Cuba. NPR released the transcript of that interview 10 days later on the 29th of December. Now, why? Why did NPR, the White House, hide the fact that the president said these things? Because it would look bad for the White House if the president had said he was going to open up embassies in Cuba and Iran in the same week. And I think in both instances, we have a president who is grossly undermining American resolve to stand up to serious threats to the United States. Iran is a much more serious threat from Cuba. They're nowhere near ready for a U.S. embassy. Just in November, Supreme Leader Khamenei released a 9-point plan on how to wipe the state of Israel off the map. It's still a state-sponsored terror, and we shouldn't be talking about opening an embassy with them right now.
Well, we take a look at this president, and you have worked for a long time in the intelligence business, and anyone involved in politics, we talk about opposition research, where they say, hey, wait a minute, first research yourself. So mindful of that, with no disrespect intended toward this president, we have about 3 minutes left. Based on this president's resume, biography, and the reality of his last 6 years in office, how do you assess Barack Obama and his perception of the projection of American power and his perception of America in general?
He seems to have a very disturbing view of the role of America in the world. His apology speech in 2009, where he repeatedly apologized to Muslim audiences for past American policies, his tendency to criticize the Bush administration and blame it for all the world's ills concerning the United States. This has really been a terrible record by an American president in terms of foreign policy. I think he's hurt a reputation in the world, and I'm worried that as his presidency comes to an end, he'll be much less constrained to do some things which I think are very dangerous and unwise, like possibly normalizing relations with Iran, and who knows what he's planning to do with North Korea.
With the 2 minutes that remain, and let's return to the subject of Iran. It's one thing to talk about an embassy or, quote, a normalization of relations, but the supposed international negotiations to keep Iran from gaining access to nuclear weapons. In the final analysis, will President Obama and Secretary Kerry rationalize allowing Iran to continue with development of nuclear weapons?
We've made so many concessions, JD, to Iran in these nuclear talks that I'm convinced the president has decided to concede the nuclear bomb to Iran because he's so desperate for a deal. And I think this is in part due to the thought of many liberal foreign policy advisors with Brookings and Georgetown University that we can live with a nuclear Iran. I think that is simply dead wrong. But I think that's where we're going. And as you say, rationalize, that's the right word to use. I think that has already begun, that Kerry and Obama and Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, they're preparing the way for a deal that's basically going to concede the nuclear bomb to Iran in hopes that we can somehow manage it.
Wow, an ominous forecast for the new year, but Fred Fleitz, we appreciate the fact that you offer that unvarnished analysis, and we look forward to having you back again real soon. Thanks again for joining us and Skyping in today from Washington, D.C.
Good to be here.
Now, a couple of notes to you and the way you may be viewing us. Right now, you're seeing us on 2 channels on Dish. We're currently broadcasting on the channel that had been reserved for the Fox Business Network, channel 206. Of course, we're available on Dish 24/7 on channel 223, and on DirecTV, you can watch us on channel 349. You also see the other availabilities, including your own computer, NewsmaxTV.com. Stay with us. A Newsmax Now update follows.